Evening, beautiful people. I hope you're well. Hope you're having a lovely day. Today, I want to speak on inheritance taxes. Now, a lot of people don't understand inheritance tax or don't value it, but it's very it's a very important thing to understand because if you don't put a system in place to allow you to avoid taxes or allow your assets to avoid taxation, um, when you pass away, your children will not be beneficiaries of your assets. The government will be beneficiaries of your assets. So I'm going to break this down. In the UK, we have a baseline, two baselines of £325,000 and £500,000 per year. Now, the £325,000 baseline is for your immediate family, so your children or anyone who's immediately related to you. Um, and what that does is any money below £325,000 will not be taxed. However, any amount above £325,000 will be taxed at 40%. So, for example, let's say if you had a house worth £425,000 and you wanted to leave it to your child, the government to take 100,000, which is above the 325,000 mark, and charge it at 40%. So the government will effectively take £40,000 from your property. Um, However, if you're leaving it to someone who's a friend or colleague who's not within your immediate family, then the rate goes. My apologies, I made a mistake. So if you're leaving it to someone who's not within your immediate family, the rate go it comes down to £325,000. So if you're leaving it to a friend or colleague, the baseline is £325,000. But if you're leaving it to someone within your immediate family, like your son or daughter, then the rate is £500,000. And then anything above £500,000 get taxed at 40%. So for example, if you have a house worth £600,000, £100,000 is above the £500,000 mark. That 100,000 gets taxed at 40%, and the government can take that 40%. So pardon me for making my mistake. So if you're leaving property or any assets to someone who is within your family, the baseline is increased to 500,000. But if you're leaving property or assets to someone who is not within your family, the baseline is reduced to 325,000. That's number one. Number two, you can leave assets and property without any inheritance charge to your spouse. And this is not someone you're cohabiting with. So there's no other form of partnership that's recognized apart from marriage. So if you're married to someone, then you can leave. Not only do you leave your the total value of your assets without any inheritance tax to them, you also leave all your allowance. So, for example, let's say you have an allowance of 500,000 for your child. Your wife has an allowance of 500,000 for your child. If you pass away, unfortunately, then your £500,000 allowance plus your wife's £500,000 allowance would be allocated to your wife. So your wife will have an allowance of £1,000 to be able to allocate to your children. So if your property is under 1,000, if your property is under £1 million, then your wife would be able to use that £1 million inheritance exempt to protect your assets, to protect your properties, so that your family doesn't, your children can benefit from your assets and your properties. And this is why only 4% of people in the UK actually pay this inheritance tax, because it's only for the most affluent people within society. It doesn't affect the majority of people. But I still think it's good to understand it, because we all want to elevate ourselves, not just financially, but in all areas. And growing and understanding those laws is one way you can do that. Um, so that's number two. Um, Number three, what are the ways in which you can avoid this inheritance tax? So you can use gifts and you can use trusts. Um, so you can use a lifetime trust. There are other types of trusts you could use. Basically, a trust is a separate legal and economic entity that can protect your assets, because the trust gets taxed at a much lower rate, around 20%, than you would have had if you just didn't create a system to be able to protect your assets. So if you have a trust, then your trust can you can put your assets in your trust. So either your stock portfolio or your properties or whatever other assets you have under your trust, and then you can make it such that your children get paid a dividend from the assets within your trust, and they might pay a capital gains tax of 20%. So if you have shares, instead of just selling your shares so that your children get an inheritance tax of 40%, or the government selling your shares and imposing an inheritance tax of 40%, you can put your shares under a trust and then mandate that your children can't withdraw those shares from that trust, but they get paid a yearly dividend from the assets within that trust. You can also do it with property as well. You can make it such that your children get paid a percentage of your rental income from your rental properties contained within a trust. Gifts. So gifts have a stipulation of £3,000 per individual per year. So you can't give a gift of more than £3,000 per individual per year, or £250 for per individual per year for small gifts. Um, However, there is a loophole around this in terms of if you give a gift of more than £3,000 per individual per year, and that person has had that gift for 7 years, and you didn't die for 7 years after you gave that person that gift, then that gift becomes inheritance exempt, which means the government cannot tax that gift. So, for example, let's say I give my child a property worth £1 million, and I'm still alive for 7 years after giving my child that property. On the 8th year, the government will not be able to charge any inheritance tax on that property. Other things you can do, you can give a wedding gift. The government cannot charge inheritance tax on a wedding gift, and there are other loopholes around this. So basically, I'm just trying to enlighten as many people who benefit from this on inheritance tax, how to avoid inheritance tax, what it is, and I hope it blessed you. I hope you enjoyed it. Um, yes, thank you for listening. This is Flourish, and I try to educate people as much on finances from a biblical perspective. Thanks for listening, and have a lovely evening. God bless you.